When clients come to work with me, one of the most common stories I hear is, I've already spent thousands of dollars to heal and nothing has worked. This story often comes with a mix of bitterness, grief, and discouragement, but the most dangerous emotion it can come with is distrust. While other emotions like bitterness and grief can be painful or heavy to bear, distrust is one of the most dangerous emotions I see in potential clients because it breaks their ability to rely on others. And relying on others is something we all need to be able to heal, because whether it's a matter of paying an expert to help us in something that we can't do ourselves, or simply trusting a friend or family member to care about us and bear our burdens in the midst of difficulty, distrust sows the seed of unwillingness to move forward and get what we actually need to heal: other people. That's why on today's episode, I'm digging into the topic of how to handle distrust that comes along with multiple providers or solutions not working, and when you've paid time, money, and effort and end up in disappointment and pain. On this episode, I'm going to be sharing parts of my own personal story with distrust and discouragement in my health, along with quotes from the book that I've been digging into on trust and stories from the lives of my clients. Whether you're trying to heal your gut, your hormones, your thyroid, brain, or any other set of symptoms or conditions, I hope this episode encourages you and gives your brain something new to chew on as you move forward in healing. All right, so for today's episode, it is going to be a little bit back and forth because I wrote out a very generic outline of things I wanted to hit and concepts I wanted to hit, but I really wanted it to be a little bit more organic, as if I was talking to you, and also give an opportunity for a place for me to share some of the thoughts I've been processing, because there are lots of things that I see and experience and am thinking through, things that I see my clients going through. And I am an external processor, guys. I'm an external processor, which means sometimes I have ideas as I talk. So I have a generic outline and we're going to see 100% where this goes, but I am already very excited for what we're going to be talking about today based off of what I've already outlined here and thought about, and also what I think is probably going to likely come out of this conversation. So this episode came out of the idea that I think a couple times a year, I like to dedicate an episode to talking about the mental and emotional or spiritual side or component of healing. The drag on our mental and psychological health or spiritual health, and also how our mental, psychological, and spiritual health plays into us being a whole person, and either helping us heal or helping us be a whole person in the midst of healing. And I know you might say, well, how am I a whole person? I'm not healed. I don't feel whole. That's actually a little bit of what I want to get into today. But before we dive in, I want to start off with grounding us in some things that I've actually been reading recently. I've been reading a book called I Want to Trust You, But I Don't. It is by Lysa TerKeurst. If you've never heard of her, she has a whole podcast called Therapy and Theology. And just a side note, y'all, I do come to the conversation on mental and psychological health and emotional health with a very strong spiritual focus, especially spiritually being Christian. That is a huge part of who I am. It is a part of what has kept me sane through very hard seasons in life. So if you're not a Christian, this can still 100% be for you, but I am going to mention resources or stories that involve my faith. If that is super nauseating for you, this is probably not the best episode for you. But if you're open to it and translating it into where you're currently at, I think this could still be super, super helpful. So Lysa TerKeurst is a Christian author and speaker, and she has a podcast called Therapy and Theology, where she and two other hosts talk about all things mental health and well-being. Lysa TerKeurst has an interesting background, and by interesting, she has a very non-idyllic, she's not this perfect background, but her parents were divorced when she was middle school. She was raised up Christian, but she gave up on her faith when her 16-month-old sister died. She wrote an essay in 2008 on an abortion she had before her marriage. She then experienced her husband cheating on her and experiencing very, very painful years of having marital discord and eventually just divorcing her husband. And so a lot of her books that she's written, a lot of everything she's done speaks to how life is not showing up or happening the way we wanted it to, how we thought it was going to, how we've been working and putting effort into it going to. She literally has a book called It's Not Supposed to Be This Way. She has another book called Unglued, Making Wise Choices in the Midst of Raw Emotions. I literally have that book in my Kindle. I am going to be reading it soon. She has a book called Forgiving What You Can't Forget, or The Best Yes, Making Wise Decisions in the Midst of Endless Demands. I really loved, I have not read these books yet, but for the purposes of this topic, I feel like the books It's Not Supposed to Be This Way and Unglued, Making Wise Choices in the Midst of Raw Emotions, because being sick can make you have very raw emotions, especially when some of the natures of the sicknesses actually adds brain inflammation, which makes us more volatile in our emotions, or gives us a lot of hormonal swings, which makes us more volatile in our emotions. Guys, we need this stuff. Yes, we need to heal our bodies. That's going to help us feel more calm in general, but we cannot wait for our bodies to heal to have healed emotions. That we don't want to wait for that, because A, you could be waiting a very, very long time, and B, by the time you have that healed body, you're going to have a lot to unpack with those emotions, and it builds. It doesn't get simpler. So just to say, she's one of my resources, and she wrote a book called I Want to Trust You, But I Don't. Interestingly enough, I started reading this book several months ago, not related to thinking, oh, this is going to end up on a podcast episode or it's going to inspire a podcast episode, but just because I've dealt with my own specific issues with actually difficulty trusting God because of areas in my life where I've experienced pain and lack of fruition of things I've been hoping for or aiming for many, many years, and even just straight up pain and difficulty. And so I read the book thinking it was going to be a little bit more oriented towards my relationship with God, and generally sometimes being angry with him that things were happening and being like, okay, I trust you mentally, but emotionally that trust is not there. But as I've been listening to the book, there was one day I was at the gym and I was listening to this chapter 7, and I thought, it just hit me. Oh my goodness, this is exactly what my clients go through. They're going through lack of trust in other providers who said that they can help them, or other therapies. Maybe it was just like a supplement package you bought online, or some type of, you weren't maybe directly working with a person, but you bought something that was marketed to say it's going to help you, and it hasn't helped you fully or at all, or whatever it is. And there's a lot of, what do I trust? How do I move forward with this when it seems like I can't even trust my own decisions? By the way, the subtitles to this book, how to know, or the subtitle to the book, I Want to Trust You, But I Don't, is Moving Forward When You're Skeptical of Others, Afraid of What God Will Allow, and Doubtful of Your Own Discernment. Couldn't have been said better. So highly recommend this book if you are struggling with the issue of trust. The book, however, is written from the orientation of people making you lose faith in them. Maybe it's friends who were speaking behind your back, or a boss, or a job situation where you were treated unfairly, or she uses a lot of examples of there being betrayal in a spousal relationship. And so there's lots of great examples of ways people can betray us. But one of the things she doesn't list that I was like, oh, I think this is happening, is providers or practitioners not providing with us the way they want to. And let me just be frank before we go further. I'm not saying that those providers were not trying to be helpful. I do think that when, in the cases of a friend sharing information you ask them not to share, or a spouse being unfaithful to you, there's a certain level of intentionality of, I know this is going to hurt this person. However, I'm not saying that's always the case with practitioners. I think most practitioners are well-intending. They're not just trying to take your money, but they are not skilled enough. However, wherever the intention was, that person did not help you. And so there is pain. There is a certain level of, I don't know where to go from here. How do I make that not happen again? So that's the orientation I'm coming from. But chapter 7, she says she's talking about a friend of hers who, now that I think about it, I didn't write it in my notes what she's going through, but I think she's either wanting to get married or she's wanting to have children, and she's not. And all her other friends around her are getting married and having children. And this woman's advancing in years, and she's starting to see like, I might not get to have this life that other of my friends are getting to have. And she asked her friend once, how do you handle it? How are you coping with it? Because she still seems joyful. She's like, wishes she could have those things, but she still has all this joy and abundance in her life. And she's like, how are you handling it when this thing you so deeply yearn for, you're not having? And she says, what she says to herself is, their path to see God's glory is different than mine. We are all on a journey, but where God leads us or how he leads us will always be part of a mystery. Why I got to have resolution in my health in the time frame that I did, which for most of my clients is faster than them, why I am healed and they're still working on it, I don't know. I can't explain why. It doesn't always make sense why I happen to find the exact right things I needed to do to heal. Because a lot of them, they were coincidence. Functional diagnostic nutrition, which I literally found 1 week before COVID hit, was not, I had no control over when I found it or that I found it. And the fact that when I took that program, they did a test on me that I found I had a parasite. I didn't have complete control. I had control over picking that program, but I definitely didn't have control about finding out about it. I was looking for programs that I thought would teach me the skills that I needed to help my clients further. I actually wasn't even looking for help for myself. I thought I was good. I was not good. I still needed work. But there's a certain level of there's certain things we can't control. I wanted to be married for many, many, many years. And I was married, for some of you, maybe this sounds young, but I was married at 27. And my husband, he wasn't shocked. He thought he was going to get married at age 27, but I'd been wanting to be married since I was in college. In college, I was like, when am I get the boyfriend I'm going to marry? And then after college, okay, it's in a year now. I'm going to meet the man I'm going to get married to. And I was a bridesmaid in 2 weddings for 5 years in a row. So there was 10 weddings that I was in. Or I guess 9 weddings, because the 10th wedding that I was actually in, not just attended, but I was a bridesmaid in. My 10th wedding that I was in, I was actually a bride. But it was 5 years after just starting to have the marriage loop happen, where I was like in a wedding, 5 years where I was not the person getting married. And it just felt like forever. So that's one example. I think I've had friends go through infertility. Some of you are maybe in that specific journey right now, or have friends or daughters or family members, sisters going through infertility. There's things that we know we can have some impact on, but we often don't have full control. Like, we can't just smack someone up on the head or smack our bodies and be like, get it together. We can't always control those things so directly. We can only keep trying. So what do we do in the meantime? Their path to see God's glory is different than mine. Let me tell you my story of how I handled this when I was depressed. We're actually going to go back. So I got sick, like physically, biologically, pooping, bloating. By pooping, I mean constipation, constipated, bloating, hair loss, period disappearing. All that happened in 2015, but it pretty much prior to 2015, from like 2013 and prior to that, I pretty much struggled with on and off near constant anxiety and depression. I was medicated from grade 7 onward through high school, through college, and only got breakthrough in the late part of college. But I'd been in counseling, I'd been praying, I'd been doing anything I could think of or find online to try and break or improve my situation with anxiety and depression. Well, in the middle of college, I was working on continually bringing this to the Lord of like, what am I doing wrong? Why can't I get rid of this depression? Like, I know being depressed doesn't make me bad, but like, it's not a pleasant experience. It's genuinely almost physically painful. It makes you feel crazy. It's just not fun. And so I was talking with the Lord, and I really felt him say this thing that almost felt offensive, But I sensed a gentleness when he said it that I really pondered it for several weeks. And it was, if you never get rid of your depression, am I still good? You can be like, right. If God has control of all things, if it never goes away, is he still good? Does he mean he's a jerk? Is he kind of like, sucks to be you, right? And that honestly brings up the whole issue of the question of suffering, which we are not going to cover on today's topic. But I was almost a philosophy major, and I love topics like these, not because they're fun, but because they're necessary, because we are all inherently going to come up. And especially if you're chronically ill, I think we have the edge on thinking about the important matters of life because we are suffering. For people, and not to say that they're bad, but in America in general, or in modern first world countries, we are often very separated from chronic levels of suffering, chronic fear and anxiety that I won't have food to eat tomorrow, or I'm not safe, or I'm cold or too hot because I don't have shelter. That's like not an overarching issue on a day-to-day basis. It's not that we don't have overexposure from, social media and comparing ourselves and feeling we're less than and maybe chronic pain. But when we have chronic illness, that's a certain level of suffering, and we're thinking about these deeper questions. And so even if you've never framed it in the perspective of, is God good? I think I'm going to bring it back to the provider situation, like how to move forward with providers. But we need to go really deep to come back up and make it practical. So I pondered this question: if I still have depression for the rest of my life, and I really was pondering, my depression was bad enough that I felt bad. Like, how could I really consider that I could marry someone in good conscience depressed? Because I don't think I could have children in good conscience knowing how depressed I was. It seemed I had a mother who struggled with her mental health, but she started struggling with it after she'd already been having kids. But knowing I had mental health issues and choosing to have kids seemed unwise. And so the whole issue of even marriage and children was on the table with my depression, let alone my day-to-day happiness and functionality. And I remember coming to this point as I was processing it, where I simply decided and said, God, if I'm supposed to, and if you are going to allow me to have depression the rest of my life, that is what's going to happen. And I'm still going to praise you. And what I actually I'm not expecting any of you listening right now to decide God's good in the midst of all your pain. You can still be mad at him. I get mad at him for stuff. God can handle your madness. But aside from something theological, what happened inside me was actually a certain level of acceptance, of accepting and saying, I am dealing with this thing. I still am not okay with it. I'm not going to stop fighting it or fighting to no longer have it. I'm not going to just give up and become a blob. And this isn't actually hopelessness. It is submission and saying, it's acceptance. This is where it's at right now. Is it where I want it to be? No. Do I wish I was married? Yes. Do I wish I could have kids? Yes. Do I wish I wasn't sick? Do I wish whatever it is that you're struggling to make suddenly happen? And in this case, it's that we're talking about no longer being sick, no longer being in pain, not having your diagnosis you have, not having chronic bloating, whatever your symptoms are. Think about those. That's what we're talking about. Can we take a moment and say, it's not where I want it to be yet, but I can accept it today and say, my life is still, there are other things in it that I can call it good. It's good that I'm alive. Now, as of hearing this podcast, I have zero expectation that hearing me say this makes you suddenly feel this way. Actually, I would be surprised and maybe somewhat doubtful, but we're introducing a concept that you can journal, you can think about, you can bring up to a counselor, the idea of acceptance. And here's how this is important. I get clients who are all ranges of sick, all types of sick, but for the most part, our average is 10 years of sickness where nothing has worked. So they've all been, in those 10 years, they haven't been doing nothing and sitting on their hands. They've been actively trying different strategies like diet restriction and paying providers like counselors, nutritionists, chiropractors, functional medicine people, buying supplements. 10 years is the average. And on average, it is not just one symptom, like I get headaches. It is whole body issues, brain fog, pain, skin issues, bloating, weight gain, weight loss, food sensitivities, just like the world is closing in and they're in a cage. Those clients, even though I have clients who can look very similar from one person to the next of the number of symptoms they have, how long they've been sick, the age they are, the life stage they are, do they have kids, do they have teens, are they working? They can have very similar life stages. Some of my clients are much more peaceful about the process of the fact that they aren't where they want to be. Doesn't mean they never cry about it, no, but they're at this peacefulness of when I make a decision to invest, for example, and trust somebody again, I'm making it from an empowered place. I'm not a victim of that person, but I'm making it from my own decision. And even if this doesn't yield the results I want, I will continue moving forward in my own power. It is a totally internal work. It is a mindset shift. However, their overall sense of urgency and intensity and anger and all the things that can actually take how you feel sick-wise and just multiply it by 10 and how miserable you can feel, it brings it down. It brings it down. And that's what happened. I personally believe I see a correlation in people who get better having a component of that acceptance, which is mind-bending. Like me healing from my depression, I do not think happened 100% because I said, oh, I'm going to accept that I can still have a life that is worth living or good, even with this condition. I don't think it happened 100% because of that, but I think it helped. It reduces the pressure. It reduces the cortisol release. It reduces all the anxiety hormones that are being released as you are trying to heal, because you are simply breathing in and saying, this sucks. I'm in pain. This is not fun. And I'm accepting it. And this can be wild and crazy. And for me, I did make little lists of like something I could be happy about, even if it didn't like truly make me deep happy, because depression's like, it's like deep in there, but it'd be small things. And I didn't force myself to be grateful. That's another interesting thing I did not do, and I'm not recommending. I didn't actually force myself to be grateful. I simply said, I trust you, God. Because to me, God is a figure I could always trust, even if I couldn't trust humans. And even if my life wasn't good right now, didn't mean God wasn't trustworthy. So that is where God does come in for me specifically. But in Lysa's book, I want to trust you, but I don't. She has this phrase. She says, we cannot attach our hope to the outcomes we desperately want. I'll say it again. We cannot attach our hope to the outcomes we desperately want. So sometimes I get clients, and by sometimes maybe 50% of the time, it's a pretty high ratio, people come to me and their hope for healing with me is 100% on the outcome. Now, should you be asking providers questions or trying to ascertain if that person could probably actually help you? Sure, yes. And Lysa talks about that in her book on just because we're like trusting people is a healthy thing. Does that mean that we trust everyone? No, there are people we genuinely should not trust. But she talks through the nuances of when our trust is broken, we now are more sensitive to small things that make us feel that we can't trust something. And so she's like, there could be perfectly trustworthy people who do small things, glances of their eyes, a tone of their voice, that make our internal alarm system go off of, this is not a trustworthy system or a trustworthy person, and then distance ourselves from that person, even though they are trustworthy. So that's where in her book, she does bring up a lot of great topics on when you're doubtful of your own discernment. That is a great thing to read. But I do see clients come in and they do a VIP application call. It's just a free 20-minute call that we have. And they spend the majority of the call just, how can you prove that you're going to make me better? I can't. I'm not going to pretend. But we can talk about details. We can talk about facts. What labs have or have you not done? What protocols have or have you not done? What was inside those protocols? What order did you do them in? What has not been looked at as a potential cause or factor in your health issues? Is there something we need to be doing first that you haven't even attempted first? And so your body's not handling everything else. That is provider by provider basis. Not all providers are trustworthy with your health future. That could be true. Maybe it's even true for me, depending on what you have going on. Yes, I might not be the right provider for you, but I do hope this podcast episode still helps you. So really, to trust other people or to decide to move forward, you don't want to attach it to the outcomes, because the outcomes are not always guaranteed. We want to attach it to something more secure, potentially just saying, my life, I'm going to accept that my life is the way it is right now, and I'm going to decide in my heart that it is still a good life. And I'm going to walk in empowerment that I make choices on my own, and I'm not a victim to other people's charisma or forcing me to do anything. None of that. At the end of the day, when you make choices to spend money or not spend money, to work with someone or not work with something, you're not a victim when you do that. You're making an empowered choice. Now, one tip I sometimes give clients who are really burnt out on their trust or feel like they're having a hard time discerning things because it just feels like everything makes them feel suspicious. Nothing feels great. One thing I recommend sometimes is just taking a break. Don't work with anybody for a while. Just accept your symptoms are going to be how they're going to be for a month, 2 months, 3 months, however long you need, to take off the pressure from finding the one, finding the thing that's going to heal you. Again, that's so much pressure on one thing. It can happen as business owners. I don't know how many of you are business owners. I'm a business owner, so it's another frame I'm really familiar with, which is I'm only going to be happy with my business when it's blank amount of profitable or blank amount of followers on Instagram or the podcast or blank amount of revenue or blank amount of, fame, right? It would be so defeating in my business if I constantly compare myself to Mark Hyman, who's ginormous and has put lots of work into his company and business he runs and has a very different approach to healing than I do and is just a different place than I am. Yes, could I say he's more successful? Would this be the version of like, I'm the less healthy person, someone else is more healthy? Maybe because they did a program, maybe not at all. Maybe they just happen to be a healthy human being walking down the street. Yes. Is it okay to feel emotions and to just be like, today I'm angry. Right now in this moment, I am sad. Right now in this moment, I am grieving that my house makes me sick and other people's houses don't make them sick. Am I grieving that there's been a loss of financial wellness because of this situation? Sure. But guys, I recently said on a coaching call to my clients, I've actually never thought about this directly, but I've spent tens of thousands of dollars for my family to be healed and get a better situation with our mold health, right? Tens of thousands of dollars. How often do I think about it? Not very often. And maybe you say, well, that's because are quote unquote healed or like you're in a better place. Yes, that's true. And in the moment when I was making decisions about what to pay and like what to do to try and help heal from mold or get out of the situation, was it very stressful or was there tension about picking choices based off of how much they'd cost or not picking choices? Sure. I didn't ignore those factors. Was it really sad when we moved from a place we thought was moldy, and it was definitely a little moldy and causing issues, to a place that was actually more moldy, even though we thought it was going to be better off, and it made us more sick, and then we had to move again in less than 3 months? Yeah, that was really stressful, really frustrating. And also on top of that, I was literally like, on top of this, I'm the quote unquote mold expert. When I say that, I knew all the right things to do, and I still got caught in a little mold trap. Yes, were tears shed over that? 100%. But it doesn't mean I can never trust a house again. Did I potentially cry and have nightmares about moving into the home we currently live in right now because I felt our ERMI wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, and I wanted absolute proof we wouldn't get sick when we moved in? Yes. But what did I do? I focused on the details. I actually said, okay, here's the Ermi. It's not as good as I want it to be, but I have reason to believe it still might be a safe home for us. I phoned a friend. I got somebody who's literally in our Better Belly Blueprint coaching program, Lynn Furtado, who's been on our podcast, whose husband's an engineer and they specialize in indoor air quality. I literally brought my Ermi and multiple other Ermis I have to her to say, I'm having a hard time being objective. Can you help me think through if this home would be safe for my family? And they helped me come up with a couple strategies to do additional testing that are not ERMIs or even mold testing, but a couple other types of tests like staying at the house for a day to see if my symptoms or my daughter's symptoms flared when we were there. So those are some things just to say the emotions are still there, but the emotions come and go. It's the decisions and honestly, the peace of mind that we want to solidify, that you can be sad and angry and end up having peace of mind at the end of that process. I think it's when you get to that place of groundedness that you will both make better decisions, you will be more satisfied in your day-to-day life, and you will probably actually find the healing you want. Possibly, and I think that third point it's a little nebulous. Like, I don't know how or why it happens. Maybe it's the cortisol levels are lower. Maybe it's just that you're making more clear-headed decisions because you're more peaceful. And then that leads you to more likely getting your outcomes you want. But however it works, that is a correlation I've seen. So when you've spent tens of thousands of dollars healing and you don't know who to trust, you can have compassion on yourself first off. Just be like, yeah, that sucks. That is unfortunate that your body is sick to begin with, and that you've had so many failure points of people not being able to help you who kind of have types of names or trainings that suggest they should be able to help you. Have compassion on yourself, feel the feelings, but then get to a point where the feelings are like a little bit, poured out. I would, because mold was in the house, just to like help myself calm down, I would go and cry on my porch step or in my backyard. Of course, I would walk back into the house because we hadn't moved yet, but I would just be like, I just need to like have some distance from the mold. I would just go somewhere outside just to cry and like let it out. Call a friend, talk to somebody who is calm. Like I talked to my friends, Lynn Furtado and her husband, Edward. If you're in our Better Belly Blueprint, you can come talk to us in the program and there are group coaching. You can go to betterbellytherapies.com/blueprint, learn about our program options, join, add on group coaching, and come and get support there. Or you can talk to a friend of yours if they're good at listening. You can read this book, I Want to Trust You, But I Don't. But find a way to then take those emotions and get them a little grounded. And you can do some practice just playing with the idea. You don't even have to agree with it or 100% feel on board, but like think about what it would feel like to say, or even just say out loud or say in your head, I accept where I'm at. It's not where I want to be at, but I accept that I'm where I'm at, and it can still be a good life. Yeah. Are there really unfortunate components? If I was still depressed, would that be sad? 100%. I'd be super sad. It would be very sad that a human was still that depressed for that long and potentially having totally altered the direction of my life. However, it still could have had a meaningful, good life. All right. That is it. I know this is a little bit more of a nebulous training. I usually love hard facts. I love the science. If you're all for that, go listen to all our other episodes. I did want to leave you guys off with some other resources of podcast episodes you can listen to from our podcast that are more specific. Number one, I have an episode called episode 33, How to Know It's Time to Get Help, plus How to Find a Good Health Practitioner. That's a little bit more practical on like questions to ask your health practitioner to interview them, or red flags to look for in practitioners. I guess I didn't have this prep, but also our whole pathogen series that starts with H. pylori. It's like a 7-part pathogen series. I do give a lot of ideas and red flags for if you're hiring a practitioner and you're talking to them about specific pathogens you may or may not have. Listening for red flags on like, what does your protocol look like to do XYZ thing? I will add a link to just the H. pylori protocol or H. pylori episode so that, because that's the first episode in the 7 pathogens series. So you can just listen to H. pylori, and then we have things like candida and parasites, etc. I'm going to provide a link to download our podcast vault where you can find all of our episodes by category. So like bloating, IBS, constipation, testimonials. They're all organized there. And then I'm going to actually just explicitly in the show notes put my top 10 favorite podcast testimonials from the podcast that we've done thus far. And they all have different components to them. Like my first podcast testimonial we had on the podcast back in 2020 to that same client a year after she worked with me, and following up and seeing did her symptoms or did her like health improvements stay. Desi, who was a mom who was super healthy but still struggling with a lot of health symptoms. Jessica, who had hormonal issues and PCOS. Sharon, who had fibromyalgia. Becca, who had IBS. Anitra, who had 6 years of constipation, even though she was a nurse and worked in the military and was super healthy and fit. T, who worked with me because of listening to Anitra's episode. Helene, who was basically not too old to heal, one of our older clients, and you're never too old to heal. Rachel, who had only been sick for about 6 months, and basically you can never have too recent of a problem to heal. And then Eric, who was a dude, and just because we do work with men, and I wanted you guys to have a male testimonial episode you could listen to. But those are a bunch of resources that could help encourage you, hear other people's stories. I encourage you not to compare yourself to them or be bitter, but just know that you can heal. And all these people felt the same way you did. They all felt that things had already failed them. They all felt that they'd already spent money that didn't work on healing, or even been told by other providers that they couldn't heal and that they were stuck. So those are just a list of things I hope is helpful. And I do have a link in the show notes for Lysa TerKeurst book, I Want to Trust You, But I Don't, and her podcast, Therapy and Theology. And if you want to work with us, we have links to work with us. You can join the Better Belly Blueprint today. There's no wait list. If you want to learn more about it, you can go and read about it at betterbellytherapies.com/blueprint, or listen and watch a video about it at betterbellytherapies.com/training. And if you want to work one-to-one with us, and instead of DIYing it yourself in the Better Belly Blueprint, where it like takes you through a process on how to do everything you need yourself, then you can join us as a Better Belly VIP client and book a VIP free 20-minute call just to make sure it's the right thing for you by going to betterbellytherapies.com/VIP. So that is it. I hope that's lots of resources, lots of thoughts to help you process and think through things. And other than this, I hope you have a great rest of your day. I love you. I believe in you. I believe your body can heal. It's just a matter of making small changes and twists. It might not even be a huge financial change that you need. And so that is why we create this podcast. And I can't wait for you to get the breakthrough that you're going to get, and you to be able to tell your breakthrough story for other generations and other friends and people. And if that's you and you didn't work with us, but you get your breakthrough, email us. Tell us what your breakthrough was. We'd love to hear it. All right. Bye.